This forgotten portrait reveals a dark secret that no historian has ever noticed, until now. Dr. Rebecca Coleman had examined the photograph a dozen times over the past month. It sat in the Missouri State Historical Archives, cataloged simply as Unidentified School Group circa 1870s, Pleasant Grove. The image showed two women, one white, one black, standing before a wooden schoolhouse with approximately 20 children of both races surrounding them. It was unusual for the period, certainly, but the archive contained many unusual images from Reconstruction-era Missouri. What made Rebecca return to this particular photograph again and again was something she couldn't quite articulate, a sense that she was missing something important, some detail hidden in plain sight. On a humid afternoon in July 2024, Rebecca decided to use the archive's new high-resolution scanner to digitize the image. The technology allowed her to examine photographs at a level of detail impossible with the naked eye or even a magnifying glass. She carefully placed the fragile photograph on the scanner bed and initiated the process. 15 minutes later, the digital image appeared on her computer screen. Rebecca zoomed in slowly, examining faces, clothing, the building's weathered boards. The children looked comfortable, some smiling despite the long exposure times typical of 1870s photography. The two women stood with identical posture, both holding books. McGuffey readers she could now see clearly. Then Rebecca zoomed in on the black woman's face and neck. Her breath caught. There, visible now in the enhanced digital resolution, were marks she had never noticed before. Faint but unmistakable scars circled the woman's neck, the kind of scarring consistent with years of wearing iron collars. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she zoomed in further on the woman's hands, which rested on a child's shoulder. More scars, these on her wrists, the distinctive marks of manacles. Rebecca sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She looked at the photograph's catalog information, circa 1870s, Pleasant Grove. She pulled up the handwritten note on the back of the original photo, which had been photographed separately. Spring term, Pleasant Grove, April 1871. April 1871. Only 6 years after the abolition of slavery. Rebecca's expertise was in Reconstruction-era education in Missouri. She knew the history intimately. In 1871, integrated schools were not just rare in Missouri, they were illegal. The state had passed strict segregation laws in 1865, and any attempt to operate a mixed-race school was met with legal prosecution and often violence. Black teachers were extremely uncommon, and a formerly enslaved woman teaching in an integrated school would have been virtually impossible. Yet here was photographic evidence of exactly that. Rebecca picked up her phone and called her colleague, Dr. James Morrison, who specialized in African American history during Reconstruction. "James, I need you to come to the archive immediately. I think I found something extraordinary." "What kind of extraordinary?" James asked, his interest clearly piqued. "The kind that might rewrite what we know about integration in Missouri," Rebecca said, her eyes still fixed on those scars, those marks of bondage on a woman who somehow became a teacher. "The kind that's been hiding in our archive for over 150 years and nobody ever noticed." James arrived at the archive within the hour, his expression skeptical but curious. Rebecca had worked with him on several projects over the past 5 years, and she knew he respected her scholarship, but she also knew that what she was about to show him would challenge everything they both understood about Missouri's educational history during Reconstruction. "Look at this," Rebecca said, gesturing to her computer screen where the high-resolution image was displayed. "This photograph has been in our collection since 1982, cataloged as an unidentified school group from the 1870s. I've looked at it before, we all have, but I've never examined it like this." James leaned forward, studying the image. He saw what Rebecca had initially seen. Two women, one white and one black, standing together in front of a schoolhouse, surrounded by children of both races. His eyebrows raised. An integrated school in Missouri in the 1870s? That alone is remarkable. "Keep looking," Rebecca said. "I'm going to zoom in on the black teacher's neck and hands." As the image enlarged, James's expression changed from curiosity to shock. The scars were clearly visible, circular marks around the neck, linear scarring on the wrists. He was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "Those are slave scars, iron collar and manacles. She was enslaved for years, probably decades given the depth of that scarring." "Exactly," Rebecca said. "And this photograph is dated April 1871, only 6 years after abolition." James pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "Rebecca, do you understand what this means? A formerly enslaved woman teaching in an integrated school in Missouri in 1871? That shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. Missouri's segregation laws were ironclad. Schools were separated by law, and black teachers were virtually non-existent," Rebecca finished. "I know. Which means this photograph is evidence of something that was deliberately erased from the historical record." James leaned closer to the screen, examining every detail of the photograph. "Look at their posture," he said, pointing to the two women. "They're standing as equals. Same stance, same positioning, both holding the same books. This wasn't a white teacher with a black assistant. This was a partnership." Rebecca nodded. She had noticed that too. The body language in the photograph spoke of equality, of shared purpose. The white woman wasn't positioned in front or elevated in any way. They stood side by side, both with their hands on children of different races. "We need to identify these women," James said. "We need to find out who they were, how they managed to operate this school, and what happened to them. Because if they were doing this in 1871 Missouri, they were risking their lives every single day." Rebecca was already pulling up property records from Clay County, where Pleasant Grove was located. "I'm starting with land ownership records. If they operated a school, even an illegal one, they needed property. Someone owned that building and that land." James moved to a second computer terminal and began searching through census records from 1870 and 1880. "I'll look for teachers, black women who listed their occupation as educator, anyone who might match our woman in the photograph." They worked in focused silence for the next 3 hours, occasionally sharing findings, following leads that went nowhere, backing up and trying different approaches. The archive's reading room emptied as other researchers left for the day. But Rebecca and James continued working as the afternoon light faded outside the windows. Finally, just after 6 o'clock, Rebecca found something. "James, look at this. Property record from Clay County, dated 1869. 5 acres of land near Pleasant Grove purchased by Catherine Hayes for $40. And look at the notation the clerk added. Unmarried female, northern origin, educational purposes." James came over to look at the screen. Northern origin. That suggests she might have been from an abolitionist family, and the clerk noted educational purposes, which means her intentions were known from the start. Oh, the breakthrough came the following morning when James discovered a collection of personal letters that had been donated to the archive in 1995, but never fully cataloged. The letters had been written by Catherine Hayes to her sister Margaret in Massachusetts between 1869 and 1872. James's hands trembled slightly as he opened the first box. Rebecca joined him at the research table as he carefully unfolded the first letter, dated September 1869. "Dearest Margaret, I've arrived safely in Missouri and completed the purchase of the land near Pleasant Grove. Father would be proud, I think, though Mother would worry terribly if she knew what I truly intend. The people here are not welcoming. They view anyone from the north with suspicion, and an unmarried woman purchasing property raises eyebrows and unwelcome questions. But I am resolved, dear sister. I will build a school on this land, and I will teach any child who wishes to learn, regardless of the color of their skin. I know this violates Missouri law. I know the dangers. But Father did not spend 20 years fighting for abolition so that freedom could mean separate and unequal. If no one else will act on that principle here in Missouri, then I must." Rebecca looked up at James, her eyes bright with excitement. "Well, so Catherine Hayes was definitely an abolitionist's daughter. She came to Missouri specifically to open an integrated school, knowing it was illegal." James was already reading ahead through the letters, scanning for any mention of the black teacher. He found it in a letter dated March 1870. "Margaret, I must tell you about the most extraordinary woman I have met. Her name is Eleanor Price, and until 6 years ago, she was enslaved on a farm not far from where I now live. She learned to read in secret, taught by the farm owner's daughter who, apparently, took pity on her and defied her own father to provide Eleanor with books and lessons hidden in the barn. When I announced my intention to open a school, word spread through both the white and Negro communities. Most white families want nothing to do with me, but Eleanor came to see me 3 days ago. She walked directly up to my door, knocked, and when I opened it, she said without preamble, 'I hear you plan to teach Negro children. I can help you. I've been teaching freed people to read for 4 years, using a Bible and whatever scraps of paper I can find. If you truly mean to open a school for all children, I want to be part of it.' We talked for hours, Margaret. Eleanor is remarkable, intelligent, fierce, and utterly determined. She told me, 'I spent 25 years not being allowed to learn anything except what my owners wanted me to know. I won't spend the rest of my life watching children, black or white, be denied education because of hatred and fear.' By the end of our conversation, we had made a decision that I know will shock you. We will open this school together, as partners, not as a white teacher with a black assistant, but as equal partners in this endeavor. I know how radical this is. I know the danger it represents, particularly for Eleanor. But Margaret, how can we claim to believe in equality if we do not practice it in every aspect of our work?" Rebecca sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by what they were discovering. They were partners from the very beginning. In 1870, Missouri, a white woman and a formerly enslaved black woman decided to open an integrated school as equals. James was reading through more letters, his expression growing more somber. "Rebecca, the tone changes pretty quickly. Look at this one from August 1870. He showed her a letter where Catherine's usually careful handwriting had become more hurried. We have received our first direct threat. Someone nailed a note to the door of the school building. Yes, we have managed to complete construction of a simple one-room structure. The note said we have 1 week to abandon our plans, or decent citizens will take necessary action. Eleanor wants to proceed. She says she has survived far worse than threats. And I agree with her. We now have 12 students enrolled, 6 Negro children and 6 white children. Their parents are taking enormous risks by sending them to us. How can we abandon these families because of threats from cowards who won't even sign their names? Rebecca and James spent the next week immersed in Catherine's letters and cross-referencing them with newspaper archives from Clay County. What emerged was a story of remarkable courage and equally remarkable violence. In a letter, dated October 11, 1870, Catherine described an attack that neither historian had found mentioned in any official record. Margaret, I'm writing this with hands that still tremble from last night's events. They came after dark, 8 or perhaps 10 men with their faces covered by cloth hoods. They carried torches and clubs, and they surrounded our schoolhouse while Eleanor and I were inside preparing the next day's lessons. They demanded we come out. Eleanor wanted to bar the door and wait, but I knew they would burn the building with us inside if we refused. So we stepped out together, and I was grateful that the children had all gone home hours earlier. The leader spoke. I recognized his voice as belonging to a man who owns a farm 3 miles from here, though I will not commit his name to paper even in this private correspondence. He told us we had defied their warning. He said that what we were doing was an abomination, that Negro children and white children must be kept separate, that we were corrupting the natural order that God himself established. Eleanor responded, Margaret, I have never been simultaneously so terrified and so proud. She stood absolutely straight, looked directly at these masked cowards, and said in a clear, steady voice, These children are learning to read and write and think. If that threatens your natural order, then your order deserves to be threatened. One of the men struck her then, hit her across the face with such force that she fell to the ground. I rushed to help her, but 2 men grabbed my arms and held me back. They wanted us to be afraid. They wanted us to beg and plead. But Eleanor stood back up, blood running from her split lip, and said something I will never forget. I survived 25 years of being owned like property. I survived being forbidden to learn, to think, to be fully human. Do you honestly believe your little nighttime raid frightens me? They destroyed the schoolhouse that night, Margaret. Broke every window, smashed the desks and benches Eleanor and I had built with our own hands, tore our precious few books to shreds, and scattered everything we had worked so hard to create. Then they left, warning us that if we rebuilt, they would return and do far worse, to us and to any family who sent children to our school. Eleanor and I sat in the ruins as dawn broke. I confess I wept, though Eleanor did not. When I finally regained my composure, I said, Perhaps we should leave Missouri. Perhaps this fight cannot be won here. Eleanor looked at me with those fierce eyes and said, We start rebuilding today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. James looked up from the letter, his voice thick with emotion. They rebuilt. We know from the photograph that they rebuilt and kept teaching. The photo is dated April 1871, 6 months after this attack. Rebecca nodded, already searching through the next batch of letters. She found what she was looking for in a letter from November 1870. The new schoolhouse is complete, smaller than before, and we built it partially hidden from the main road, nestled among trees where it cannot be easily seen from a distance. Several men from the Freed People's Community helped us build it, though they could only work at night, too frightened to be seen helping us during daylight hours. We have also gained an unexpected ally. A white farmer named Thomas, whose property borders ours, came to visit us last week. He is elderly, nearly 70 years old, he told us, and he fought for the Union during the war. He said to us, I did not spend 3 years fighting to end slavery only to watch cowards and night riders destroy freedom with threats and violence. I will keep watch over your property. If I see anyone approaching who means you harm, I will fire my rifle as a warning. As Rebecca and James continued reading through Catherine's letters, they began to piece together Eleanor's extraordinary story. But it was a document James found in a separate collection, court records from Kentucky dated 1866, that revealed the full scope of Eleanor's determination and the scars Rebecca had discovered in the photograph. The document was a deposition given by Eleanor Price in a legal case involving property disputes after the Civil War. In it, Eleanor had been required to provide testimony about her life as an enslaved person. The testimony was clinical, recorded in a clerk's matter-of-fact handwriting, but the content was devastating. Eleanor Price, Negro female, approximately 30 years of age, testifies that she was born into slavery circa 1836 on the Hartwell Plantation in Kentucky. She remained enslaved there until 1861, when she was sold to a farmer in Missouri named Robert Price, from whom she took her surname after emancipation. During her years of enslavement, She was made to wear an iron collar for a period of 3 years as punishment for the offense of teaching herself to read using discarded newspapers. She also bears scarring from manacles, as she was chained during field work following an attempt to escape in 1859. Rebecca felt physically ill reading the testimony. 3 years in an iron collar for teaching herself to read. And look at this. She attempted to escape. Even before the war, Eleanor was fighting for her freedom. James was cross-referencing the dates. If she was born around 1836, she would have been about 25 when the war ended in 1865. 25 years old and carrying scars from 9 years of particularly brutal treatment, the collar and the manacles. By the time this photograph was taken in 1871, she was only 35 years old, but she'd lived through experiences that would have broken most people. But there was more to discover. In Catherine's letters from early 1871, she wrote about conversations with Eleanor that revealed even more about her partner's past. Eleanor told me something last night that explains so much about her fearlessness. This is not her first school, Margaret. After the war ended, she traveled to Kentucky and attempted to open a school for freed children there. She managed to teach for nearly 3 months before local authorities shut her down. They arrested her, charged her with inciting unrest, and she spent 2 weeks in jail before a sympathetic judge dismissed the charges. She tried again in 1867, this time in Tennessee. That school lasted 5 months before it was burned to the ground, with Eleanor barely escaping with her life. She was beaten severely in that attack. The men who destroyed that school told her that if she ever tried to open another school, they would kill her. "So why did you come to Missouri?" I asked her. "Why risk it again?" Eleanor looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "Because every child I teach is proof that they were wrong about us. Every Negro child who learns to read destroys their lie that we are incapable of learning. Every white child who learns alongside a Negro child destroys their lie that we cannot coexist as equals. I will keep opening schools until they kill me, Catherine, and even then, the students I have taught will continue the work." Rebecca stared at the photograph on her screen, at Eleanor's scarred neck and wrists, understanding now the full weight of what those marks represented. This wasn't just a woman who had been enslaved. This was a woman who had been brutally punished for seeking education, who had escaped, who had been arrested and beaten, whose schools had been burned down, and who kept trying. The Pleasant Grove School wasn't her first attempt at integrated education. It was her third. James was making notes, his handwriting rapid and urgent. "This changes everything, Rebecca. The photograph isn't just evidence of an integrated school in 1871 Missouri. It's evidence of a multi-year, multi-state campaign by one woman to make integrated education a reality. Eleanor Price was conducting a one-woman civil rights movement nearly a century before the term existed. The letter that corresponded to the photograph's creation was dated April 20th, 1871, and it was one of the longest Catherine had written. Margaret, something significant happened this week that I must record in detail. A traveling photographer named Mr. William Hayes, no relation to me, despite the shared surname, came through Liberty taking portraits for families who could afford his services. Eleanor and I saw him on the street and made a spontaneous decision that I know carries enormous risk. We approached him and asked if he would photograph our school, all of us together, teachers and students. Mr. Hayes was immediately hesitant. He understood what such a photograph would represent, and the danger it could bring to everyone involved, including himself. "Ma'am," he said to me, "if people see that I made a picture of a mixed school, I could lose my business. Folks around here don't take kindly to this sort of thing." But Eleanor spoke to him then. She said, "Sir, I understand your fear, but I want you to understand something. In 50 years or 100 years, people will need to know that this was possible. They will need proof that in 1871 in Missouri, Negro children and white children learned together as equals. They will need to know that some people tried, that some people believed it could work. Without proof, without a photograph, our story will be erased as if it never happened. And that erasure will be used to claim it was never possible, that people like us never existed." Mr. Hayes thought for a long moment, then said, "I'll do it." But I won't advertise that I made this picture, and I can't keep a copy for my own portfolio. This will be your photograph, and yours alone. Yesterday afternoon, we gathered all 22 of our students and assembled in front of the schoolhouse. Eleanor and I stood together as we always do, as partners and equals. We held our teaching books. We placed our hands on our students' shoulders, and Mr. Hayes captured that moment on his camera plate. When he showed us the image, I was overcome with emotion. There we were, Eleanor with her quiet strength, me with my determination, and our students, Negro and white, sitting and standing together without a trace of the divisions the world outside tries to force upon them. Some of the children were holding hands. Some were smiling despite the long exposure time. They looked comfortable, natural, as if this integrated school were the most ordinary thing in the world. Because for them, it is ordinary, Margaret. These children do not see race the way their parents do. They see their classmates, their friends, their study partners. They see people who help them with difficult arithmetic or who share their lunch when someone forgets theirs. They have learned that skin color has nothing to do with character, capability, or worth. That is what this photograph captures. Not just an illegal school, but a vision of what America could become if we could overcome our hatreds and fears. Rebecca saved the letter to her research files, her hands shaking slightly. She knew James. Catherine knew that documenting this was dangerous, but she also knew that, without documentation, their story would be completely erased. James was examining the photograph again, this time with a deeper understanding of what he was seeing. And look at Eleanor's positioning in this photograph. She's not hiding her scars. Her neck is clearly visible. Her hands are prominently displayed. She could have worn a high collar, gloves, something to conceal the evidence of her enslavement. But she didn't. Because she wasn't ashamed, Rebecca said quietly. Those scars were proof of what she'd survived, proof of why this work mattered. She wanted them visible. The letters from May 1871 revealed a dramatic escalation in the persecution Eleanor and Catherine faced. Rebecca found the critical entry dated May 16, 1871. Margaret, they have arrested Eleanor. The county sheriff came to the school yesterday morning during our arithmetic lessons. He had a warrant charging Eleanor with inciting social disorder and unlawful assembly. The charges are absurd. Our crime is simply teaching children to read, but the law does not care about truth when it can be used to enforce hatred. The children were terrified when the sheriff walked in. Several began crying. I stood immediately and demanded to know on what grounds he was arresting my partner. Sheriff Dalton, a man whose contempt for both of us has been evident from the beginning, told me it was none of my concern. I said, Eleanor is my partner in this school. If you are arresting her for teaching, then you must arrest me as well. We are equally responsible for every lesson taught here. The sheriff actually laughed at me, Margaret. He said, Miss Hayes, you're a white woman from a decent family, even if you are misguided. You're not going to jail. But this one, he pointed at Eleanor with obvious disgust, she knows better than to cause trouble. She needs to learn her place. Eleanor stood with perfect composure, though I could see her hands trembling. She told our students, Do not be afraid. I will return soon. Continue learning. That is the most important thing. Then she looked directly at me and said, Keep the school open, Catherine. Do not let them win. Promise me. I promised. Though the words nearly choked me, they took her away in chains, Margaret. Chains on a woman whose only crime is educating children. I have not been able to see her. They refuse my visits, claiming I am not family. Her trial is set for 3 days from now. James had found the trial transcript in the Clay County courthouse records. The document was brief. The entire trial had lasted less than 2 hours, but it was damning in its revelation of the justice system's prejudice. State of Missouri versus Eleanor Price, May 18, 1871. Judge Preston Walton presiding. Prosecution called 3 witnesses, Mr. Robert Dalton, Mr. Henry Cobb, and Mr. Samuel Wright, all residents of Clay County. All 3 testified that the defendant had been stirring up trouble among the Negro population by teaching ideas of racial equality. Mr. Cobb testified that the defendant's school was an affront to Christian teaching and natural law. Mr. Wright testified that the defendant was encouraging Negro children to forget their place in society. Defense attorney Mr. Frederick Brennan objected repeatedly to the vagueness of the charges and the lack of specific criminal conduct. Objections overruled. Defense called no witnesses, as the defendant, being Negro, is prohibited by law from testifying in cases involving white complainants. Rebecca felt a familiar anger rising as she read. They convicted her without ever allowing her to speak in her own defense. The entire trial was a sham. The verdict had been predetermined. Guilty on both charges. The sentence was 30 days in the county jail and a fine of $50, an enormous sum in 1871. Catherine's letter from the night of the verdict was written in a visibly shaking hand. They convicted her, Margaret. Despite the obvious injustice, despite the lack of any real evidence, they convicted her. Judge Walton said in his sentencing that Eleanor's punishment would serve as a warning to others who might seek to disturb the natural hierarchy established by God and nature. I tried to pay her fine immediately. I have money from father's inheritance, but they refused. The judge said Eleanor must serve the full 30 days as a lesson in humility. But something extraordinary happened as they were leading Eleanor from the courtroom. An elderly man named Thomas, the farmer who has been helping protect our school, stood up without being called and began speaking. He said, Your Honor, I fought for 3 years in the Union Army. I fought at Wilson's Creek and Pea Ridge. I lost a son at Shiloh. I fought so this nation could remain united and so that all people could be free. What these women are doing is not a crime. It is the fulfillment of everything we fought for. Teaching children to read is not a crime. It is hope. The courtroom erupted. Some people applauded. Others shouted him down. But Eleanor looked at Thomas with such gratitude, and she looked at me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Keep teaching, Catherine. Do not close the school. That is how we win." Catherine's letters from the next 30 days revealed her determination to honor Eleanor's request. Despite the obvious danger, despite being alone, Catherine kept the Pleasant Grove School open every single day of Eleanor's imprisonment. "Margaret, I am teaching alone now, and it is far more difficult than I imagined." Eleanor had a gift for managing children of different ages and abilities simultaneously. She could have 3 different lessons occurring at once, moving seamlessly between groups, ensuring each child received the attention they needed. I struggled to do what Eleanor made look effortless, but I persist because I promised her, and because these children deserve an education regardless of whether their teachers are free or imprisoned. Something unexpected has happened. Several community members, both Negro and white, have begun helping in small, quiet ways. A Negro woman named Ruth brings food for the students whose families cannot afford to send lunch. A white carpenter named Mr. Davies came last week and repaired our broken desks without being asked, working quickly at dawn before others might see him. Thomas continues his nightly watch, ensuring no one approaches the school with violent intent. Even more surprisingly, 2 mothers, one Negro, one white, have begun assisting with lessons. They do not call themselves teachers, and they come separately at different times so as not to be seen together, but they help the children with reading and arithmetic. They are terrified of being identified, but they come anyway. It is as if Eleanor's arrest has awakened something in people. Some are angry at the injustice and want to resist in whatever small way they can. The school has become more than just a place of learning. It has become a symbol. Rebecca found supporting evidence for this growing resistance in newspaper articles from the Liberty Tribune. The newspaper's tone was hostile, but the content confirmed Catherine's account. Concerns persist regarding the unlawful educational establishment in Pleasant Grove. Despite the recent arrest and conviction of one of the principal agitators, reports suggest that instruction continues. The white woman involved has shown a stubborn refusal to accept the judgment of the courts and the will of the community. Local authorities are monitoring the situation. 2 weeks into Eleanor's imprisonment, Catherine was allowed to visit her in jail. Her letter describing that visit was one of the most moving documents Rebecca had read. "I was finally granted permission to visit Eleanor yesterday, after submitting 3 written requests to Sheriff Dalton. The conditions of her imprisonment are unconscionable, Margaret. She is being kept in a cell no larger than 8 feet by 8 feet, with no window and no proper bed. Only a thin, filthy blanket on a wooden platform. The heat is oppressive. The smell is terrible, and Eleanor has lost weight that she could not afford to lose. But her spirit, Margaret, her spirit is undiminished. When I told her that the school remains open, that we have 20 students still attending, that members of the community are helping, she wept tears of relief and joy. I was afraid they would close it, she said. That was my greatest fear, that my arrest would mean the end of what we built together. I assured her that the school would be waiting when she was released. Eleanor reached through the bars and took my hands. The guard allowed us that small mercy and said something I will carry with me forever. Catherine, you and I are proving something that they desperately want to deny. We are proving that their world, the world of separation, of hierarchy, of hatred justified by law, is not inevitable. It is a choice, and we are choosing differently. Every day that school remains open, every child who learns to read, every friendship that forms across the color line, it is all evidence that another world is possible. They can imprison me, but they cannot imprison that truth. Eleanor was released from jail on June 14, 1871, after serving her full 30-day sentence. Catherine's letter from that day described a small crowd that had gathered at the courthouse. Students, their families, Thomas, and others who had been helping the school. But the letters from the months that followed revealed that Eleanor's ordeal had not ended with her release. In September 1871, the violence escalated to a horrifying new level. Catherine's letter from September 24, 1871, was barely legible, the handwriting shaky and ink blotted. Margaret, I do not know if I have the words to describe what happened last night. They came again, more of them this time, perhaps 20 or more men. They came in the dark, as cowards always do, but this time was different. This time they brought tar and feathers. They seized Eleanor while 2 men held me back. I screamed, I fought, I tried to reach her, but they were too strong. They stripped away her outer clothing and poured hot tar over her back, her arms, her neck, over those scars she already bore from slavery. Then they covered her with feathers, creating a grotesque costume meant to humiliate and degrade. It is a punishment designed not just to cause physical pain, but to destroy dignity, to break the spirit through public degradation and mockery. They wanted Eleanor to beg, to plead, to submit. But even covered in tar and feathers, even as her skin burned from the hot tar, Eleanor did not beg. She looked at those men with contempt and said in a clear voice, "You can cover me in tar, but you cannot cover the truth. These children will continue learning. They will grow up knowing that your hatred is not stronger than our love. They will remember what you did here tonight, and they will judge you for it." After the men left, Thomas and his wife helped us bring Eleanor to their home. Mrs. Thomas worked for 3 hours to remove the tar, using lard and patience. Eleanor's skin is burned in many places. She can barely lift her arms. The pain must be excruciating. And yet this morning, when she could barely walk, when every movement caused her visible agony, Eleanor insisted on going to the school. She stood before our students, 23 of them now, Margaret, more than ever before, still visibly injured, and she told them, "This is what hatred looks like. This is what people do when they are afraid of change, afraid of equality, afraid of truth. But look around this room. Look at what we have built together. You are what love looks like. You are what courage looks like. You are worth every scar I bear. Do not ever forget that." James had to stop reading, overcome with emotion. Rebecca was crying openly. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Rebecca said, "How did she survive this? How did she keep going?" James shook his head. "I don't know, but she did. The photograph is from April 1871, before the arrest and before the tar and feathering. But we know from the letters that the school continued for months after these events. Eleanor and Catherine kept teaching. But the letters also revealed the toll this violence was taking. In November 1871, Catherine wrote, "Eleanor and I talked last night about how much longer we can continue. Not whether we should continue. That question has been answered. Our students deserve education, and we will provide it as long as we are able. But whether we can physically and emotionally sustain this work under constant threat of violence is another question entirely. We are both exhausted, Margaret. The vigilance required to operate this school, the constant watching for threats, the planning of escape routes, the fear that each day might be our last, it takes a toll that is difficult to articulate. Eleanor's injuries from the tar and feathering have healed physically, but she moves differently now, as if waiting for the next attack. And I find myself unable to sleep through the night, startling awake at every sound. Thomas told us yesterday that he has heard rumors of another, more serious attack being planned. He urged us to close the school temporarily, to let tensions cool. But how can we? We have 31 students now, 31 children whose education would end if we closed, 31 families who have risked everything to send their children to us." The letters ended abruptly in April 1872. The last letter Catherine wrote to her sister was dated April 3rd, and its tone suggested finality. "Margaret, Eleanor and I have made the most difficult decision of our lives. After 2 years and 4 months of operating our school, after teaching more than 300 students in various stages, after surviving raids, arrests, beatings, and tar and feathering, we are closing the Pleasant Grove School and leaving Missouri. This is not surrender, though it feels like it. Thomas came to us 3 days ago with information from a source he trusts. There is a plan to kill us both, not to frighten us, not to warn us, but to end our lives. The men planning this attack have grown frustrated that legal prosecution and physical violence have not stopped us. They have decided that our deaths are the only solution. Eleanor wanted to stay. Even knowing the threat, even understanding that it is credible, she wanted to continue. If we leave, she said, they win. They will have proven that violence works, that terror is effective, that courage has its limits. But I convinced her, barely, that our deaths would serve no one. Our students need us alive, even if we cannot teach them directly. The cause of integration needs us alive to continue the fight elsewhere, in places where it might be safer. We held a final gathering with our students and their families last night. Eleanor told the children that the school building was closing, but their education was not ending. She told them that they had learned the most important lesson, that they are capable, that they are worthy, that they are equal regardless of what the law says or what society claims. Several of the older students pledged to continue teaching the younger ones. Parents promised to form small learning groups, meeting in homes and barns, continuing the work we started. The school building may close, but the idea, the truth that education is a right, that integration is possible, that equality is achievable, that idea will continue. I am returning to Massachusetts. Eleanor is going north. She has not told me where exactly, as it is safer if fewer people know her destination. We do not know if we will see each other again. But we know that what we built together in Pleasant Grove cannot be destroyed by violence or hatred. It lives in our students, in their families, and everyone who witnessed that an integrated school could exist, could thrive, could change lives. Rebecca and James spent the following weeks tracking what happened to both women after they left Missouri. Catherine returned to Massachusetts and taught in a school for black children in Boston until her death in 1894. Eleanor's trail was harder to follow, but James eventually found records showing she taught in Philadelphia for 25 years, becoming a prominent advocate for integrated education long before it was legally mandated. But the most remarkable discoveries came when they began tracing the students from the Pleasant Grove School. Using census records, city directories, and genealogical databases, Rebecca and James documented extraordinary outcomes. James, the black student who appeared in the photograph, became a teacher himself, operating a school in Kansas City for 40 years and teaching more than 2,000 students. Samuel, the white student who had been James's friend, became a lawyer and spent his career taking civil rights cases without charge. A girl named Ruth became one of the first black women to attend college in Missouri and later founded 3 schools for black children. Another student, Daniel, became a minister who preached racial equality in his church and was eventually forced to leave Missouri because of his beliefs. Rebecca created a comprehensive study showing that of the identifiable students who attended the Pleasant Grove School, more than 60% went into education, activism, law, or ministry. Vocations focused on social change and equality. The rate of literacy among these students and their children was more than double the average for Missouri in that period. They didn't just receive an education, Rebecca said to James as they compiled their findings. They received a vision of what was possible. Eleanor and Catherine showed them that integration could work, that people of different races could learn together and be friends. And those students spent their lives trying to make that vision a reality. The final piece of their research involved finding descendants of the students in the photograph. Rebecca and James located 17 families who could trace their lineage directly back to children who attended the Pleasant Grove School. They invited all of them to the Missouri State Historical Archives for a special presentation. On a warm afternoon in September 2024, Rebecca stood before the high-resolution image of the photograph, with descendants gathered around her. She told them the complete story of Catherine and Eleanor, of the violence they endured, of the courage they showed, of the legacy they created. An elderly man, the great-great-grandson of James, stepped forward to look closely at the photograph. He pointed to a young black boy standing next to a white boy, their arms around each other's shoulders. "That's my great-great-grandfather," he said quietly. He used to tell us stories about a school where black kids and white kids learned together, where 2 women teachers were partners and friends. We always thought they were just family legends, stories embellished over time. I never knew it was real. I never knew it was this important. "It was real," Rebecca said. "And it was more than important. It was revolutionary. Catherine and Eleanor proved that integration wasn't just possible, it was powerful. They proved it 83 years before Brown versus Board of Education, 94 years before the Voting Rights Act. They proved it when doing so could, and nearly did, cost them their lives." Another descendant, a middle-aged woman, was crying as she looked at the photograph. "My great-great-grandmother is in this picture. She's one of the girls sitting in the front. She became a teacher, too. She always said she was taught by the bravest women she ever knew." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. Someone wrote that on the back of the photograph. "The bravest women I ever knew." We think it was written by one of the students, decades later as a memorial. The photograph now hangs in the Missouri State Historical Archives' permanent exhibition on education and civil rights. Beside it is the complete story of Catherine Hayes and Eleanor Price, documented through letters, court records, and newspaper articles that Rebecca and James spent months compiling. But more than that, Rebecca made sure that Eleanor's scars, the marks that had been hidden in plain sight for 153 years, were explained in detail. A placard next to the photograph reads, "If you look closely at Eleanor Price's neck and wrists, you can see scars from iron collars and manacles, evidence of her years in slavery. These marks are not hidden in this photograph. They are visible, purposeful, a testament to what she survived and why she fought. Eleanor Price endured 25 years of slavery, 3 years in an iron collar as punishment for teaching herself to read, and brutal violence for attempting to educate children across racial lines. Yet she continued. She taught in 3 different states, survived having schools burned down around her, endured arrest and tar and feathering, and she never stopped believing that education and equality were possible." This photograph is proof that she was right. The photograph is no longer forgotten. The story is no longer erased. And 2 women who risked everything for a vision of equality finally received the recognition their courage deserved. Eleanor Price and Catherine Hayes taught for only 2 years in Pleasant Grove, Missouri, but their students taught for decades, and their students continued the work. The seeds planted in that small wooden schoolhouse in 1871 grew into a forest, a legacy of educators, activists, and advocates who understood that equality was not just a distant dream, but a present possibility, proven by 2 brave women who refused to accept that hatred was stronger than hope. The photograph had kept their secret for more than 150 years. Now, their story would be told for generations to come.